Assalamu alaikum. My name is Asif Siddiqui. I'm here with a friend of mine, Mohammed Al Ani, and he's with me, and we are at the crossroads. I'm going to start with a concept that I was really curious about in our conversation. We're having a bit of a WhatsApp conversation back and forth, and this is the concept of cultural capital. And I want to know what exactly it is. Let's just try and get into what that is. And there'll be a follow-up to that, which I might as well tell you now. So in that context, what is Muslim cultural capital?
The term capital itself, usually is associated with money or
Mhm.
material capital and so on. However, sociologists, when they were trying to navigate how power relations emerge, how who rises up and down and so on, it's really ridiculous to say that money is the only force out there. You can
Mhm.
have all the money in the world, right? But if you are missing specific types of capital, you're not going to be able to influence the social order around you. It could be divided to multiple levels. So one of those let's say, institutionalized cultural capital, having a PhD, right? So in that
Okay.
sense, yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay. Yeah. People recognize you.
yeah, exactly. But aside from the specific form, there are things like you can think of a group of friends. There's someone with a cultural capital who knows all the jokes of that friendship dynamic,
Hmm.
who knows how to carry themselves, what kind of style of conversation to have, the tones and so on. So, and that, for example, becomes very relevant if you're an artist or if you are even a professor, like that,
Right.
you know how to play the role and so on.
Yeah.
Knowing the different categories and research and so on, what things to cite and references and so on. So that element, sociologists sometimes call the hidden curriculum, as
Mhm.
that is one of the source of power that wealthy people have. They nurture their kids to have a particular type of cultural capital, this invisible thing
Mhm.
that just prepares them to take on the roles that are influential in society. And so that becomes this hidden source of your success. Now, to go back to Ibn Khaldun was alluding to something here, saying that your educational system should not be just about the cognitive explicit portion. There needs to be some sort of a guiding philosophy, which is the intuitive mind,
Mm.
this form of intuition, this guided intuition,
Mm.
to create this class that invents things, that is an active player on the world, right? Following instructions and following just like recipes forever, that's not where innovation comes from.
No, not innovative. Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Would a concept like tarbiyah be kind of associated with like the development of this kind of subtle cultural capital?
What Ibn Khaldun says is the Muslim habitus is a fascinating phenomena that actually pushes against the civilizational cycle. And so he says Islam is one of the few forces, the only force in the world that actually can allow a civilization to rise with a thriving urban society without everyone becoming super weird at the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is this the Muslim cultural capital that we're talking about, or is that something a little bit more?
I was actually, when I was talking about the Muslim cultural capital, what I was saying is right now, this is a particular hidden education that we got that we're not paying attention to. We've been raised to hate ourselves, for example, because of post-colonial institutions, educational institutions, and so on.
And when you mean hate ourselves, means like consider ourselves a subclass.
Inferior.
Is it the imposter syndrome?
Aside from the imposter system we don't think of ourselves as the default. And so we need to nurture a particular type of this intuition, habitus, whatever you want to call it, this subconscious that thinks of itself as the default. Something fascinating is going on in North America. People are not paying attention to. North America is a place where what colonialism did goes to die. And people are not noticing. I'll give you examples.
Yeah,
Number
tell me
one,
more about
look
this.
at RAS right now,
Uh-huh.
right? Everyone here defines themselves as Muslim, and it's normal. So we're not Iraqi, Pakistan. No one cares.
Yeah, it's true.
No one
True.
cares. And you go and be like, I go to Muslim Ridgeway Halal Plaza. This is revolutionary.
Yeah,
What's going on?
We go to Ridgeway.
Right? We go to Ridgeway.
We
Right?
go to Ridgeway. It's default now.
So what's going on is the environment we're in is reorienting this like habitus, let's call it that. By the way, habitus is used not like personality or intuition. The reason that this concept specifically used, because this hidden part is shaped by historical forces and social context. It's not like a personality that's individualistic. So right now for us as Muslims in the West, number one, the nationalist project that started after colonialism is dying without people noticing. There is a process of fragmentation of the tradition, which eventually leads to putting Islam at the forefront as the guiding moral force. And what we're seeing here is even when we go beyond that issue, like that what the environment is doing to our identity, here Muslims in the West and North America specifically, Canada, America, are the most educated Muslims on earth. They are also probably the most multicultural, right? So they have all these forces to become extremely creative. Their creativity could be a massive contribution to Muslims across the globe. They think of themselves also. The last thing I'm going to say here is, how can you have inferiority in relation to the West if you are the West? You know, in
Good.
fact, here we're seeing people have inferiority relation in relation to the East, to the Muslim world. There's this whole point of the Exodus. Let's go back. Let's go back.
That's
That
right.
never happens in the Muslim world, right?
That's right.
And so I personally think that the environment here is creating a fascinating generation, and it's worth investing in and cultivating that hidden curriculum that no one's paying attention to.
We have the ability to be creative, but at the same time, creativity within some kind of paradigm. There's some bounds or some kind of directionality about how we're creative, because you could just be creative, like, okay, I'm gonna become the most creative movie artist or whatever. But the question of halal, haram, is this permissible? Is this virtuous? Is this ihsan? Those kind of concepts are strong concepts.
Let's take the example of the scientific revolution that took place in the West and compare it to the Muslim one. So Muslims had a scientific revolution. However, the animating force was different, or the drive. For these people, who started the scientific revolution, I call them the Whigs, the white Whigs,
Yeah.
what happened to them is what? Is that the driving force was rebellion against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala,
Yes.
right?
Abandonment of God.
Yes. For us, it was what? It was surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Allahu Akbar.
Algebra, one of the contributing forces is Muslim anxiety to figure out mirath and inheritance. The development of sanitation system, water system, so that we make wudu. Geography, where's the qibla? What's going on in our time, unfortunately, we are trapped within a reactionary loop. We just react a lot. We don't, and many times we just go and try to answer questions. And my suggestion is, what is our question? Ask the right question if you go and jump to answer. I personally conceptualize this age that we're in. One conceptualize a lot in a lot of ways, but one way of looking at it is it's the age of abundance. That age of abundance is here. Right now, we have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us these shortcuts. We can use AI to invent a genre of art that doesn't exist yet. You have all these tools under your disposal. You need to figure out what you want, and I think what you need to know here, like for us as a Muslim and so on, is you need to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants and try to think, okay, now this is the principle. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, honor your mothers. You need to think of, how do I manifest this into a thing in the real world? Maybe it's a research about motherhood. Maybe it's about a motherhood social movement, motherhood empowerment. Maybe it's about new institutions for motherhood, right? Like education and so on. So I think it's really important for us to start to move, to have that connection between the theory part and the principles part and the doing part. And I think by doing this, you start to see things change in the world.
If you're betting on things being the same as they were in the past, and you're not seeing this, then that kind of where you are on the wealth spectrum, how that's going to affect, your ability to be creative and be productive and be that individual or that society, that group of people pursuing and trying to serve. And what, when you say, what do you want? So what does Allah want? And how do you pursue that, right? And yes, you could say, oh yeah, some of us are already on top of that. There are companies here that are doing stuff that with AIs are very on top of that. But then, there's a whole group of us, Muslims in our society that are not on top of that. So how do we prepare, or what do we want to draw attention to?
Here's the thing. So if we do not become an active player in all these debates and discussions and so on, and I called this age, I talked and I said before the interview, I said it's the meanwhile age. Of course, not perfect. Our Islamic paradigm has been disrupted and so on. But we need to move beyond the passivity. We need to get out of the ethnic supermarket section, and go to mainstream discussions. So what I'm saying here is, if we're not part of the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of tadafa, if we're not pushing, we're not doing anything. And if we're not developing the institutions and the structures that would do this, why are we surprised that things are not moving to our direction?
When you look at our society now, the way it is structured, our society doesn't mean our broader society. I'm talking about our ummah here in North America. In North America, where should that come from? Where should that be driven? What class? What space? Because as from a sociological perspective, you think of these, you can define like these broad patterns of our collective psyches, a collective modules of thinking that are there. Not necessarily individuals. You're not talking about it in a oh, who here in this room is going to do it, but you have like an archetype, a certain conglomeration of ideas that can help people identify where should that come, where's the most effective space that can happen.
So what I'm going to say is it's important for us maybe to kind of zoom out and look at the entire ummah, right? The Prophet, peace be upon him, says the likeness of the believer is like a body. If a particular organ fails, then one work for, and just try and paraphrase the famous hadith. And so I would say that it's good to use a comparative advantage logic. I think Muslims in the West should start to actually play that role because they can do it. The role of the opinion leaders, the role of the intellectuals, the role of the creative class. We have the environment, we have the generation, and I think really one way of solving this problem as well is to get Muslims in the West, Canadian Muslims, American Muslims, to think of themselves as American Canadian Muslims.
How do we do what you're talking about? Like where, if that's going to come out, I feel like this is a liability in that space, So what are your thoughts on this?
The secret of the Renaissance was coffee. People were drinking coffee and they go and talk for 12 hours, right? We've got this point in the Muslim community or communities, they'd say, oh, people talk about, no, they don't. But I believe that cultural principles and forms don't actually manifest into things in the world until they interact, until there's some sort of interaction, people taking them, talking about them. And I think, an experiment I did with my friends, many of the conversation I'm telling you, like the things I'm saying, it's actually based on the conversations we had. We met weekly. We literally had a random wheel, like of things. We pick a random question. Let's talk about the problem of consciousness this week, right now.
Yeah.
And we're almost
Like
a literal wheel. Yeah, we're crazy like this. And the thing is, what we thought about, we entered from the perception that this is like a mind sport, and we are so
sport.
Yeah, and we're like so trapped inside of the paradigm. We're forced to think of lame questions, and we need to break it and we need to be creative about it. And so what we're doing is we went through so many things. Sometimes it got really crazy, like what our gym brothers doing, and like we were really crazy, but fine, do it. The point here is that we need to start to talk. We need to start to talk in a way that really turns the principles and the concepts that we have into at least a blueprint of action in our heads. What is a Muslim social movement? Is a Muslim social movement what we're given right now? Right now, for example, again, I gave the example of mothers, the empowered Muslim mother may be the model that we can give to the women of the world instead of the career woman model, for example. I'm not actually critiquing any models here. I'm saying that our civilization has its own unique, take and perspective. But what's going on is we're busy reacting, not interacting, using our principles and values. And I think that could be the thing that starts and triggers this.
Coffee.
I had a lot of coffee, by the way, before I showed up. So there you go. See, it already is doing the work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Inshallah. Anything that you want to kind of leave on that we haven't really, we're thinking of things, and I'm trying to think of things from my perspective and from the perspective of wealth as an instrument within society. What is, the ummah's, to serve the ummah and how that comes. Is there something that, besides this, something beyond all of it, beyond anything we've covered, or it doesn't have to be, whatever, something you want to leave us with?
So as I said, the instruments that we have and the tools that we have, are just tools and instruments. They don't actually, it's not determines the trajectory they take. The way we conceptualize them and the way we enter, and when using them, shapes the way they evolve, right? Mm-hmm. When I look at something as AI, generative AI, I'm looking at something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us to allow the emergence of new sciences. Because now, for example, it can easily connect the dots between different sciences. I'll give you a really quick example. I asked ChatGPT, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say, from his ayat, min ayati, he made like your spouses? Oh, I don't get it. Like, can you tell? Yeah. I was like, can you answer in an interdisciplinary table and then put a column saying the relevant name of God? And then it said to me, psychology, isn't it a sign that God is the all-loving al-wadud, then that he made an institution for love? I'm like, ooh, ChatGPT. I'm not saying here, right? The point that I want to say here is not that you can use ChatGPT uncritically. I'm saying that has that capability, for example, of bridging the gap between lots of fields. Imagine how wasteful this PhD project is. I go like this verse, you go to 30 disciplines, So it's allowing us to do new things. Potentially, for example, you can source the global production network. Go to AI, be like, hey, find all the different businesses around the world and get me to make my product by sourcing everything in Malaysia, Bangladesh, and whatever. And that's it. Got fully Muslim certified, made in Islamia and in the Ummah. You can do so many things in it with it. And what I would want to see is I want a discussion on what would you do beside reaction or beside cute projects. I'd actually want, here, I'm going to conclude with this. I would want Muslims to be insane. I would want people to think outside of the box and to return to our tradition of really thinking big. Because the Sahaba used to think big. Everyone used to think big. Humility is not in the dream that you have. Humility is in attributing credit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and never giving the credit to yourself.
Allah.
And I want to conclude with that.
Right, Jazakallah khair, Mohammed. That's been, I don't know, we went all over the place and back, subhanallah. But thanks for your time, man. This has been great. I think I've been wanting to have this conversation with you, not in this context. I think all the other times that we've met, I feel like, you know, we should talk about some of this.
We need Muslim spaces.
Yeah, yeah.
We need Muslim spaces where we meet and talk and, you know.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. All right, take care.